Hi, Hive community. Thank you so much for joining us on our next podcast episode. Today, we are speaking with Breanna Coleman. Breanna is one of the Hive's disability advocates. She has served on panels with us and has had great discussions as far as things that impact the disability community. So we're super excited to have her on the podcast to just share her journey. And Breanna, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. So I wanted to just kind of jump right in because I feel like every single time we have any kind of panel, we never have enough time and we get through like 2 questions. So I wanted to jump right in and get to the nitty gritty. So first, if you could tell the listeners a little bit about who you are and also tell us about your disability.
I am Breanna. I typically go by Bree. I'm 24. I graduated from the University of South Florida back in August of 2023 with my bachelor's in psychology, and I minored in children's behavioral health care. And last spring, I started my master's in social work. So I currently work as a care coordinator at Cove Behavioral Health full-time.
Amazing.
And this coming up spring, I'll start my practicum. So I'm super excited about that. I have osteogenesis imperfecta, and I'm in a wheelchair user most of the time. I'd say full time. And I have a service dog named Alden, which he goes everywhere with me. Osteogenesis imperfecta is also known as brittle bone disease. So my body lacks collagen, so I break easily, and the collagen affects your organs too. So I also have other comorbidities due to my OI.
So is it okay if I just use the term OI throughout this conversation?
Yeah, it's completely fine.
Okay. I was actually practicing saying it, and then I'm like, you know what? I'm going to just let her introduce it with the right wording, and then I'll say OI after. So let's talk about OI and just the challenges that you face, both physically and emotionally. Like, how has having this diagnosis impacted your daily life?
Ooh, it depends. When I was younger, I broke a lot. I have type 3/4, so I have a moderate to severe type of OI. And then as I became an adult, my physical needs changed. I had some injuries where I have nerve damage and a TBI, a traumatic brain injury. So I have concussion problems too on top of everything. So realistically, it affects me just daily. Everything I do, it's from a wheelchair, making sure everything is where I can reach it, everything's accessible to me. Navigating how many spoons I have left to give out if I'm having a bad chronic pain day, sometimes worse than others, and I don't have enough stamina to do the things I want to do. That's really the major things. Driving, it took me 7 years-ish to get my driver's license to get a modified vehicle. So I just started driving again the last year, and I'm super excited about that. It's given me a lot of independence. But I go through spells where I'm very independent, and I'm on my own, and then I'll have an injury like I did a month ago, and it kind of put me a few steps back in my journey of independence. And so then I can really hinder my mental health. I go through a whole disability grief of having to take those steps back and relying on people more, not being as independent, not being able to do what I want to because I need to heal. And that's why I'm gone to social work and psychology. A lot of things I'm facing now with my mental health as an adult should have been addressed when I was younger, and it wasn't, because our physical health was so prominent in the medical field, and mental health wasn't really taken into consideration. So those are some of the things I struggle with or deal with on a day-to-day basis right now.
So something that you said spoons, something about spoons to give out. Tell me about that.
The spoon theory. So in the disability community, we use an analogy for spoons, how much one spoon can hold. And so for me, if I had 10 spoons, on a really good day, I can take care of my personal issues, really be there for other people, be there for school, be there in work. But then if I have an injury, my spoons are more allocated to my health because they take more time and they take more energy, and I can't give what I want to other people or other situations.
Yeah, I've never heard that. So
it's a really cool theory. It's kind of new in the psychology field. If you look it up, though, it's really interesting.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna definitely have to put a link in to this conversation for people to look at that.
It's been a really beneficial way for me to explain to my loved ones why I act the way I do sometimes if I'm having a really bad chronic pain day or if I had an injury. Instead of just saying I'm having a bad day, it's a good way for me to be I don't have spoons. And they know what that means now. And they know how to best help me through that.
So I love that. You figured out a way to clearly communicate your needs, but in a way that feels safe to you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So another thing you said, disability grief. Tell me about that too.
It's really overlooked as my needs change over time on a day-to-day basis. A lot of people with disabilities go through a grieving process, not as if we lost a loved one, but we lose the ability to do things on our own that we work so hard for, and it takes 10 steps backwards. And we grieve that ability to be independent and fulfill our needs and fulfill our dreams, because disability is so variable and it can change so quickly.
So with you mentioned all the hospitalizations and medical needs that you have. How do you navigate all the different medical complexities and different specialists and finding? I mean, OI has to be a very niched area, and so just finding the specialists that you feel are really listening to you, and how do you navigate all that?
Trial and error. Really, for my maintenance care, I do that locally with Tampa General, USF Health, with doctors who are willing to learn about OI or who have studied it at some point in their career. But right now, if I had something major come up that required further testing or further surgery, we have physicians in Delaware, Wilmington, Delaware, and they have an OI clinic at their children's hospital that has extended it to where they can keep us till we're 35. So I'm able to go up there and get the more specialized care that I need. I have to travel, so I don't do it too often. I keep in touch with them and keep them updated on my where I'm at through emails and telehealth appointments.
How did you even get connected to that? In Delaware, how did you know to?
Every other year, the Osteogenesis Imperfecta Foundation hosts a national conference, and back in 2018, yeah, I think, I went to the one in Baltimore, and they have consults with doctors. You can have a free 15-minute consult with doctors, and I was on like my fourth local doctor to have my basilar invagination fixed. And so I went to the conference, and everybody was like, "You need to talk to this doctor named Dr. Shaw. He's at New Martin, Delaware." And I was like, "Okay, well, this is number 5. Like, here we go." And so he was there, and he's part of the OI clinic in Delaware, and he was like, "Oh, I have no problem fixing this for you. I do it on hundreds of OI patients." And so I traveled in 2019 to Delaware, and I was in halo traction for a month. And then I had my cervical spine fused. And so that's how I got in the door with them. And then after that, I ended up having to have seven other procedures with them.
Wow.
For various things. But because they're so familiar with OI and how our bodies function and what our physical needs are, it's a very safe environment. So even though it's a very long distance to travel, I do it because it's safe for me. They know how to intubate me. They know post-op care, what to do, what not to do. And they really listen to their patients. So that's why I keep going up there.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. So this yearly event, I think that I remember you saying that. Did you run that this year here, or so?
Yeah, I went since COVID, because we didn't have any. This was our first one. It's an every other year event, and this was our first national conference since 2018. And this one was in Omaha, Nebraska. So I went, and I was a panelist on 5 different panels that we spoke on. And then I was able to speak with teenagers and be really involved, not from just like a participant side of the conference, but a speaker. So that was a really cool thing to do. And I was able to share my story and give younger kids hope that, it will get better and you will figure it out.
I'm sure that had to feel so good to be on the, you have so many years of people pouring in, but then to be able to be the mentor and provide the hope, that had to be pretty cool.
It was incredible. Yeah, that's what I've always wanted to do, is to pour back into the community that's helped me so much throughout the years. And so being able to do that, I loved every minute of it. The conference was 3 days. It was very exhausting, but I would do it again in a heartbeat.
Yeah. We definitely have to make sure also that I include a link for the OI organization. So if people wanted to donate, that they could do that. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about education. So you just mentioned that you're working on your master's, right?
I am, yes.
Yeah. So what has been the biggest obstacles or challenges for you in the education system?
Like, in general or in higher education?
I'll let you choose whichever way you want to go with that.
Oh, Lord. They both have their faults,
Okay,
for
well, let's do
sure.
both. Let's do both then.
Um, Going from kindergarten through, high school was a rough ride. Um, Dealing with administration, I had more issues with that than I did students. My high school was very segregated from, they segregated the disability community from regular ed. And I came in and I was like, no. So I really pushed their buttons and I really advocated for myself. And so I was put in regular ed classes, but they tried tooth and nail to like tick me off on a daily basis, to say the least, with either you need an aid, you're a liability being by yourself, we can't accommodate that for you. Are you capable of taking honors and AP classes? Just questioning my ability as a human, and my mom did all the advocating for me till about ninth grade, and then it really turned over to me. And so, I saw my mom fought on my behalf for all those years, and there's my turn. And so that's where I really found my voice for advocacy. Um, College is a whole different ball game. I started undergrad in 2019, and then COVID hit. So most of my undergrad was done completely virtually, except for maybe 5 classes at the end. I didn't have many problems. Professors, students are very open and honest and willing to help as much as possible. The only thing I really ran into in undergrad was the school I go to. They weren't because in undergrad and college you don't have IUPs, so it doesn't roll over. So you kind of go in and you go, this is what I need, but they're not very transparent with what can they provide to you, so you don't really know what you're asking for. So I had a concussion in 2022, and I was in my senior year of college. And when I was asking for accommodations, like how do I, get through the end here, they were like, "Oh, we have something that may help with that." And I was like, "Well, that would have been really great to know in the beginning." They're just kind of problem solving as I went. And now grad school is like a beast within itself. It's all online. Thankfully, I chose a fully online program. The only problem I'm having really in grad school is I start my practicum, my internship in January, and I had it all planned out, and then OI was like, actually, you're gonna have another concussion. So I had that happen when Milton came through, and I had a brain bleed and a pretty bad TBI again, and they were like, you can't drive. And I was like, really grieving not being able to drive again. And then I was like, well, crap, how am I going to do this internship? So the only fully remote internship option they had is the crisis text line, which I don't mind doing, but I feel like they should have more opportunities for these kinds of situations. But hopefully, once I get into it, I can switch placements and do more specialized hours where I want to do them.
Yeah. So you said a lot, but like good stuff. But so in high school, when you were having to really, already face the challenges that you were already facing and trying to, go to school every day and graduate, but also having this negative idea of, you not being able to do it. What would have made, because you're not the first person we're hearing this from. You're not going to be the last person we're hearing this from. And so I love the idea of Hive being a space where people are no longer standing on their own, especially when it comes to the education system, and especially locally for sure. And so, what could have made things better in high school?
In high school, a part of the biggest issue I ran into was they viewed me not only as a disabled person, but they also viewed me as a child, right? I mean, they're the adults, right? They're administration. Like, why do we take you seriously? Why are you sitting here and arguing with me? And the other half of that is the people in places of power that were helping me with accommodations, that were supposedly helping me succeed in school, they weren't educated on how to help the disability community. So they weren't doing a good job on their end advocating for their students. If the people in places of power that are supposed to be helping us in the education system don't know what they're doing, that makes it a really hard scenario to strive in, and then I had a lot of administration make assumptions, and I was ending my sophomore year of high school, and I had a teacher tell me, "You're really too smart to be in this class. You need to be in honors classes. We recommended it to your guidance counselor." And I said, "Okay." So I went to the guidance counselor, and she was like, "Well, I've gotten several of those from you, but I didn't think you'd be able to handle it." And then in that moment, I realized, you've been withholding my education from me based on an assumption that you think I can't do it. And she was like, "Well, we'll give you a trial in these higher level classes." And I was like, "Okay, we'll see." And I did fine. I did honors classes and AP classes my junior and senior year, and I had no issues. you know, um, it's the arrogance of the staff not wanting to learn and not willing to be taught how to help the disabled community succeed in education. I think that makes a lot of unnecessary barriers.
No, that makes complete sense. And so what would also make complete sense is that those spaces be led by someone from the disability community.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's some feedback that that can be given, because I'm again sure that these spaces still do exist, and people do, in different schools, they're well-meaning, and but again, in order to get the most benefit from something that's established for individual disabilities, the leadership should have a clear understanding of what the disability community is going through, and no better way to have that than to either have someone consulting from the disability community or somebody leading it. So
yeah, absolutely. I think looking back, that was the source of a lot of the issues I had, was no one was really educated on how to help the disability community succeed in the education system. And I thought there was probably should be in regular ed classes, but there was a whole hallway of disabled kids, and there was no reason for them to be segregated down the hallway, not learning, just passing time. They should have been in regular ed classes, but they didn't know how to advocate for themselves. And so, and as a student at the time, I was fighting for myself, and I couldn't advocate for them too. And I wish I could have done more, but
yeah. And I think that's why we have the barriers of inclusion. We talk about inclusion and the idea of inclusion, but when individuals with disabilities are segregated from the time they're in kindergarten in classrooms, separate from everyone else, all the way up and through high school, then of course there's going to be barriers in people feeling like they can communicate and be at the same table and be equals, right? It's because that separation is encouraged. And so, I love the idea that our future will look much different, and that, and there are other countries that do inclusive classrooms very, very well. all the research tells us that inclusive classrooms are better for not only the person with disabilities, but the students that are alongside them. So, yeah, so hopefully that's an area that Hive can potentially make impact in. And hopefully you can be a voice in that too, Breanna.
Yeah, I'd definitely love to be.
I'm recruiting as we're talking. So, let's talk about workplace, because I remember having conversations with you last year, and there was a lot of transition that you had to make in your job, the previous job that you had, and I don't want to put you on the spot, so of course just say the things that you're comfortable with speaking. But let's talk about workplace barriers and how that has affected you.
In my previous role, I was a research assistant, and so my job was based on a grant to help conduct this research. And while I was a fully remote job, my supervisors that I worked with, I did fine at my job, and then when I had my TBI in 2022, my work and my ability to work quickly really slowed down, and they viewed that as being lazy and not wanting the job anymore. And even though I advocated, and I said I would submit documentation that like something is really wrong, and it took me 6 months before I could get in psych eval, so it was a really long process healing from that one. And right before I decided to quit that position, I found out that the days I was taking off for medical appointments, and I stated that to them, they just were like, oh, she's just calling in, she doesn't want to work. And that was hard because I thought in the role that I was in, it would be more inclusive because it's research. We're doing research for a minority population of people. So I was under the assumption that, maybe I'd have more empathetic coworkers in a sense. And that was definitely a learning experience for me. But my new job, I work as a care coordinator, and I worked in person since I started. So I've been there since July. My most recent TBI was in October, and when I had that happen, I was like, I can provide you all the documentation up front, but they clearly told me I cannot drive. So we need to make accommodations for me to work remotely, and they did not have a problem with that. They're all very caring people, and they have no concern about my work ethic. And I think what really helped with that is when I was interviewing, I was very transparent with them and said, this is my disability, and these are my limitations, and every now and then, shit will hit the fan, and so I had my primary care write a letter saying that these are the accommodations I will need to be successful in my role, and I think that was really helpful. My previous position, I didn't have any of that because I came from being an intern to an employee, so I really didn't know I needed that documentation and that level of transparency. But my job right now, I love what I do. It's definitely an adjustment though with my new injury. We're working through it.
And I love that they are being accommodating. It's so interesting about, the amount of transparency that you told them right away. Our last podcast, we had Mark come on from Equally Fit, and he mentioned that a lot of times individuals with disability community are encouraged when they're applying for a new job to minimize their disability so that they could get the job, you know. But in this scenario, it actually worked in your favor to be completely transparent, let them know, right away, the accommodations that you would need, and then to be able to get them when those situations came up. So,
Yeah, I think even when I was applying to jobs, I was really, like Mark said, it's a catch-22, right? Do you disclose your disability and in that interview without being hired, and hope that they don't discriminate against that? Or, do you be fully transparent? And I've learned, I think where I messed up the first time was I tried to conceal my disability so they didn't know the full extent of what I dealt with every day. And so when that TBI happened, they didn't know what was going on. They were like, well, why is this such a big deal for her? And that was hard for them to shift their perspectives for how to best help me. So that's why when I came into the role I'm in now, I was just very upfront so that if something did happen, they weren't taken by surprise. That whatever did happen wasn't due to my work ethic. Like, I had a good work ethic. I can prove that to you. You'll see that on my resume. But just being transparent with them and HR to say, things are going to happen, but it's not due to lack of motivation to work.
yeah.
But it's a very hard thing to decide, when do you disclose your disability status.
That leads me right into the next space that I wanted to talk about, and that is advocating for yourself. So, what advice would you give someone who is having a hard time advocating for themselves, whether in school or in work? What kind of encouraging things would you say to them?
Give yourself grace. You can't do it all. We're all human. If a place decides to not hire you, give yourself grace to know that it's probably nothing to do with you. I think as individuals with disabilities, we often, when something like rejection comes our way, we automatically, it's just a trauma response to go, it's because of X, Y, and Z, right? Because it's happened so much in our childhood, to be discriminated against and to be looked down upon. But in the workplace, it's very different. And I've also had to realize that I'm not talking to adults as a minor. It's adult to adult. Like, these are my peers, these would be my colleagues. So being straightforward with them and showing them respect and showing them I didn't have to go through all I went through to provide them the documentation that I did, but I did it to show them that, how badly I want this job. I wouldn't have put my personal life out here if I didn't want this job so bad. Is that probably going over and beyond what I could have done? Probably. But I did it so that I knew I did the best I could. And all my rejection letters I got from previous interviews, it probably had nothing to do with my disability status.
Where did this confidence come from, like the assertiveness and in your advocacy for yourself? Where do you think that came from?
My mom.
Good. Yeah.
Oh, she's gonna watch this back and laugh. I was a very shy and quiet person up until high school, and she purposefully sent me to a public high school because she wanted me to find my voice. And she jokes now that maybe she did a little too much, but that taught me what I deserved as a human. I didn't deserve less than because of my disability status. And it taught me how to be assertive and fight for what I believe in, even if it's uncomfortable.
That's so good. So you spoke a little bit about mental health a little bit early in the conversation. What are coping strategies that you have used? What are tools? What are steps that you take to help with your mental wellness?
Um, Currently I see a psychologist, and she does help. I see her at least every other week. Just having my own mental health in check, and really having time for self-care, as hard as it is. I've had to realize that balancing a disability is a full-time job in itself, and so is an actual full-time job and grad school, and when you put all those things together, and so learning to like say no to certain things, like maybe I don't need to go out that day, maybe I need to stay home and like be by myself and rest, giving myself those days to rest and recuperate and be kind to my body is something I've had to learn, that it's okay to do that. And with same thing with pain management, I've had to learn that in order for my body to heal, I can't just push through the pain. I have to feel it, I have to acknowledge it and let myself take the time to heal, even when I feel like that's not productive. I think when I was growing up, at least, it was always this idea that as a disabled person, if you weren't doing anything, you were lazy. So you had to like keep going all the time to like prove yourself. So unlearning that concept that I am allowed to have time and space to heal and to do self-care has been a pretty big adjustment for me.
That's so good, though. Just and even even the idea of productivity and um, setting boundaries on what you're able to do and how much you're able to give. Um, it's so good. So when it comes to physical, like how has your physical appearance and disability affected your self-esteem and body image?
Um, it really, my physical appearance, as far as my body, it never really bothered me growing up. Um, I had more self-confidence issues with what mobility devices I was using. I went all of through high school, refusing to use my power chair at school because I had this idea that using my power chair would make me be perceived as more disabled, and I would get less respect than I already was given. So I pushed myself to walk and pushed myself to use a manual chair when that was horrific on my body every day because I couldn't tolerate, I didn't have the stamina to keep going with that. And the more I kept trying to walk, the more I kept trying to use less mobility aids, the more harm I was doing to myself. And I had to unlearn this concept of like, you still have that self confidence even in a power chair. It doesn't really matter what mobility devices you're using. It's how the other person's perceiving you. Like, how you perceive yourself isn't based on which mobility device you use. And
That's so good.
that was a hard one coming out of high school, realizing it, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah. So what steps have you taken to develop a positive self-image?
Just being around people in the disability community who are self-confident in their mobility devices and then their appearances and trying to implement that within myself to not care how I'm being perceived to others. I think was really the biggest ones.
Yeah.
And, in high school, because I refused to use my power chair, like the 17-year-old I was, I hated crowds because I felt so small and unprotected. And my power chair gave me that protection and the more independence. I can open doors by myself with a power chair. Manual chair, I can't. There's so many things a power chair gives me that I didn't realize it did until I started using them more. So this time.
And the circle you have around you, it sounds like, as well.
Yeah,
The people you
definitely.
have around you. Yeah.
Yeah, since I graduated high school, I've made so many friends within the disability community I would have never even probably talked to in high school. And that's helped a lot because I've learned that we're all in the same boat and I'm not alone in it. And I can be vulnerable with these people and say, like, I'm having issues with this. How do you do this? And in your normal day-to-day relationships, if you don't have other disabled people around you, that can be really hard because they understand, but they'll never fully, deeply understand what you go through as a disabled person on these levels. So the community is so huge.
So you led me right into my next question. So how has OI affected your social life and your relationships?
Oh, hard one. I've had friends come and go, over the years, as everybody does. It's affected me most in family. When I was younger, they were around. I had extended family around, helping out, whatever. As I got older, family just started disappearing. They follow you on Facebook, but they don't ask you how you are. Or they see you in person and they're like, well, what are you doing now? And you realize they don't think you're, like, as an example, I ran into someone recently and they were like, well, what are you doing now? And I was like, well, I have a full-time job. And it, took them back. Like, the internal ableism really took them back and they were like, oh, you're doing something with your life. So as I've gotten older, I've had a lot of extended families step away and not be very prominent in my life because they're not willing to be taught how to communicate with a disabled person. They weren't willing to talk with me about what I'm doing and acknowledge me as a human, as a 24-year-old adult. And because of that, I just lost connections over time. And I've had a lot of instances where I'd get hurt, and it'd be on Facebook or whatever. And I'd have family members not even care to come check on me, but their response was like, oh, she's been through it before, she'll be fine. She's got it. And that's that internal ableism that they have, and I've had to let the anger go towards them because I know that they're not willing to understand it. But every time I'm injured, every time I have to go 10 steps backwards in my independence, it hurts, and the physical pain is there too. And so that's been hard, I think, to swallow. I was in the ER in October from my recent concussion, and I don't think I really understood. I think I just pushed it off for so long. It's just my problem. It's my family. Just being how they are. But my girlfriend came to see me in the ER, and she stayed with me. And after she left, I texted her, not even thinking, right? I texted her and I was like, thank you for coming to see me in the ER. It meant so much to me. And so when I got out of the ER a few days later, we were sitting hanging on my porch, just drinking coffee. And she was like, I need to ask you something. And I was like, okay. And she said, when you texted me that, do people not come visit you? And I was like, no, I don't have visitors when I'm hurt. I don't have people come see me and bring me coffee like you did, when I was in the ER. And she was like, that's wrong. And I was like, it is. Like, just because it's been my normal, for such an extended period of time, I kind of brushed off the fact that, like, that's not normal. I have a tight circle of people that really care for me and I can lean on. But as far as, people coming to visit me or people really caring, ask how I'm doing, like, it can be a very lonely world. I think a lot of disabled people have the same experiences with extended family, or friends or people at church or school or whatever it is, because they don't know how to handle it. They just distance themselves and just don't want to be a part of it.
Wow, I want to stay right here for a second because I just feel like that's so good and just good information. And so in that scenario, if there is a friend or someone whose family who feels intimidated for some reason for coming to visit. I mean, some people don't like hospitals or, just different things, but um, what would that look like? Like what if somebody were to come visit, what are you seeking? Like what would be something that you would appreciate in that moment?
This conversation, really, knowing that somebody cared enough to come see you and sit and just talk with you. Having that someone to just show up and go, hey, how are you? Like, let's get your mind off of this.
Yeah.
And because my mom's a single mom, it's been me and her for a very long time. And so I know it affects my mom too, because she needs a break every now and and yeah, just the social connection.
Yeah.
Because even in the process of healing, that takes 6 to 8 weeks or a month, depending. And it inadvertently makes you distance yourself from your community. Because you're healing, right? You can't go out and do things. You have a bunch of limitations, as far as I do with my disability. And so that puts me out of my social connections.
Yeah. So simply bringing in a coffee and sitting down and having just normal conversation, right? Yeah. So, um, so we talked about your master's level. We're gonna switch gears a little bit. We talked about your master's and that you're working on that. What's next? Like, what's your future aspirations after this?
I so when I did my undergrad in psychology, thinking I wanted to be a psychologist, and then coming into advocacy and social justice issues and policy. That's why I switched gears into social work. Because I'm a firm believer that people with disabilities need to be sitting at the table, and we need to be in the discussion, especially if it's about us. And so that's why I went into social work. So afterwards, I would really like to get my foot with nonprofits or with politics, with the National Council of Disability, to be able to sit on the table and provide input and, just help, really. And I would also like to be able to be a mental health counselor for children with disabilities as an outlet. In my journey looking for psychologists, you don't find disabled therapists. So when you have a kid, you may not be willing to open up, but they really need that. It'd be a lot easier if someone like me were there to talk with them. And they know that, you really do have a deeper understanding of what it is like to be disabled.
So this was all good. And I'm so grateful, Breanna, for just your honesty and your openness in this conversation. And I truly do hope that again, that these conversations break away barriers that we feel like we have with one another, and especially when it comes to inclusion, especially when it comes to having um, both disabled and non-disabled people in the workplace and in schools and in the community, and how we can impact um, those spaces to be better for everyone, right? To be more inclusive for everyone. So lastly, I just want to ask if there was one thing that you want to leave with the people that are listening, um, what would that be? What would you want to what would you want people to really remember about this conversation?
Don't be afraid of change, and don't be afraid to ask for help, and really reach out into your community and give yourself that love and grace that you might not have been told you deserved, and really lean on those around you in the disability community.
Good. So thank you so much again, Breanna. This has been amazing. I knew it would be. Uh, and we will get this up as soon as possible on our sites, and everyone will get an opportunity to listen in and share this conversation. Again, I will be providing links for more information about the OI Foundation and ways that people can donate, and some more things about some of the other topics that we discussed throughout this, so that people could do a little bit more digging. But thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed this a lot. It was amazing.